Good afternoon. My name is Steve Hornstein, Hornstein. I'm a 1973 graduate of Columbia College in New York City, and I'm in the original charter class of Eastern Virginia Medical School. I'd like to tell you a story that I entitle Steve Hornstein and Ronald Dozoretz, D-O-Z-O-R-E-T-Z. Not a pretty picture. Some of the background information for this YouTube you can find on my first YouTube, which was entitled Mountains of Abuse, Hills of Recovery. I first encountered Dr. Ronald Dozoretz on my preceptorship at Maryview Mental Health Center in Portsmouth, Virginia, when I was making rounds with my psychiatry teacher, Dr. David Rosen, who became my psychiatrist. When Dr. Rosen gave Ron Dozoretz a small wave, Dozoretz did not reciprocate, so I knew he had massive problems. Actually, Ron Dozoretz created Portsmouth Psychiatric Center in my hometown of Portsmouth, Virginia, just west of Norfolk, in 1970 or 1971. Immediately, he was known as a severe sex addict. One of my friends from high school, Kitty Keene, had to call a meeting of all the women employees at Portsmouth Psychiatric Center to decide how to hold off Ron Dozoretz. His reputation was extensive. He was able to commit people to his own Portsmouth Psychiatric Center, and his investors were Arnold Leon, Herbert Bangle, and Dick Davis, an ex-mayor. I ended up at Portsmouth Psychiatric Center, which is included in my first YouTube. I received a difficult injection. I started publishing some cartoon books in the early 1980s, and one of my professors at Eastern Virginia Medical School, the esteemed plastic surgeon, Dr. James Carraway, told me in 1984, what a fascinating situation. A medical student doing a cartoon book about his psychotherapy. The sweatshirt I'm wearing right now is a sweatshirt that Eastern Virginia Medical School gave me 2 years ago at the convocation of our new family practice dean, Dr. Richard Homan. Dr. Ronald Dozoretz, who is in his late 70s, is one of the most powerful people in the world. Since he created Portsmouth Psychiatric Center, all he has to do is lift up one phone. He can have anybody in the United States committed, strapped down, and injected, and living in their own filth in a seclusion room. In the mid-80s, seeking more powerful, Ron Dozoretz traveled with Virginia Senator Chuck Robb while Dozoretz was considering a run for the Senate, the U.S. Senate. There was a young so-called child psychiatrist at Portsmouth Psychiatric Center who a friend of mine from the community decided to see. And he told her that I wasn't good enough for her. Are some people better than other people? I can't begin to tell you the pain that's involved when you get stabbed with 2- and 3-inch needles in seclusion rooms. The pain of being strapped to seclusion room beds is absolutely enormous. And mostly because of Dr. Ronald Dozoretz, the admissions doctor at Eastern State Hospital, Richard Poe, MD, who is an associate professor at Eastern Virginia Medical School, and Michael Solomon, at Western State Hospital, where Dozoretz had me sent to after I lightly spray painted his fence. I tell people I've been through a mini Holocaust. What they've done to me is almost what they did to the Jews and the Gypsies in World War II. It happens, not everything I'm saying this afternoon is in exact chronological order. I was in Rhode Island sometime in the early 80s doing some faxing from a like a Kinko store and criticizing Ron Dozoretz for the large amount of seclusion, restraint in his hospital and injections. A lot of times when I wanted to call a lawyer, when I was in his facilities, Portsmouth and Norfolk psychiatric centers, they would grab the phone from my hand. About 16 or 17 years ago, the eminent Congressman Herbert Bateman from Hampton and Newport News, Virginia, held public hearings at a public auditorium in Newport News, Virginia, part of Tidewater and Hampton Roads. And before I went to the public hearing, the hearing was originally scheduled because Ron Dozoretz was screwing up the Champas people, the military people, so bad. The night before the hearing, I made 100 or 200 photocopies of some cartoons criticizing Dozoretz. About an hour into the hearing, the leader of the hearing said, anybody with position papers, place them on the rear table. I put on the rear table 100 copies of my flyer, and one woman picked up a copy and said, this looks interesting. Immediately, a policeman came over, took the flyer from the woman, and said to me, take your flyers and get out of here. We were warned that you might be here. Dozoretz has constantly obstructed my freedom of press, freedom of speech, stopping my mail from coming and going, and also inhibiting my visitors. So in the 1980s, I got stranded in New York, as I tended to get stranded when I threw away my lithium or lithium and stelazine pills. And from a stationery store in Rhode Island, I faxed a flyer all over the country, very critical of Ron Dozoretz. Again, he's very powerful. Ron Dozoretz has bankrolled the Democratic Party for the last 20 years. His wife, Beth Dozoretz, was the chief fundraiser for President Bill Clinton in his second campaign. I thumbed from Rhode Island to Springfield, Massachusetts, and developed severe blisters on my ankle, on my feet. The blisters were taken care of by an excellent trauma surgeon from Hartford Hospital who was covering the emergency room. It happens that I knew that in the late 60s, there was a fine baseball pitcher from Norview Hospital, Brent Coltrane, who passed away from foot blisters. While this trauma surgeon was treating me, all of a sudden at midnight he said to me, I've got to take this call. On the other end of the phone was Ron Dozoretz. Ron Dozoretz told him, quote, please send Steve back to Virginia so I can have him committed. This is what Dozoretz has constantly done. He is a freak. He is a freak of nature. I've read over 20 books about the Holocaust in Europe, and I know somebody who wants all the power they can have, the money they can have, the young women they can have. I call them a freak. It happens that in my first psychological testing, which was done in the summer of 1974, while I was doing some hospital work at Eastern Virginia Medical School, I learned that I had grown up with an inner psychosis in my mind that was shielded from me by a very elaborate and intensive defense mechanisms. Also, I learned that I didn't face pressure very well, and I also learned that I wasn't good in my various relationships. Now looking back, and I realized this actually at the time, into my teens and my undergraduate pre-med times at Columbia, I always felt that I had a tight band around my head that squeezed me together. Gradually, over the years, I've had psychological testing 6 or 7 times, and I hope to write a paper on the value of neuropsychological testing and following those recommendations so people can cut down their psychotherapy visits. Over the last year, I've tended to ask some so-called professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, other people, I say to them, do you think a 26-year-old virginal social worker could be a psychotherapist for a 40-year-old pregnant woman who is single and has 2 children? What does this 26-year-old virginal male social worker, what does he know about this client or about this patient? I don't think too much. At least when you're in medical school, you learn about the different phases of life and the milestones of life. My cartoon books from 1984, I published about 5 cartoon books by doing a rough draft and a dummy and going to a print shop like Norfolk Printing. And I've self-published these 60 to 80 page cartoon books, and it gives me a little bit of humor and a little bit of catharsis of the problems I've been through. Some of my cartoon books include the flip side of therapy, the flap side of therapy, the flop side of therapy, the Meshuggah methods of psychotherapy, and the way it's been. Meshuggah is a Hebrew Yiddish word for a bit crazy. Because I've had well over 200 injections of Prolixin that I didn't need, I'm crippled with tardive dyskinesia. I don't mind saying this. This first came to mind in the late 1900s when at a National Alliance on Mental Illness state conference in Richmond, Virginia, the expert Dr. David Ross from MC Medical College of Virginia faculty gave me a 40-minute test of movement and sticking out my tongue and lips and walking, and he said to me, do you know that when you walk, your right arm swings a lot more than your left? I said, no. It happens that Dr. Lillian Tidler, who was my psychiatrist at Central State Hospital in 2009 and 2010, she told me that in my right shoulder, I had a combination of tardive dyskinesia and Parkinsonism. I like to write. My poetry does very well. I have, I mostly write Jewish poetry and mental health poetry, and some have been published, and some are in the collections of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, the Yad Vashem Memorial, Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. That's one of my hobbies. At this time, I am looking for an attorney. For 25 years, I have been looking for a medical malpractice attorney to sue Ron Dozoretz, Richard Poe from Eastern State Hospital in Virginia, who is now in Texas, and Michael Solomon, who caused me to have dozens of injections in the late 80s when I was in Western State Hospital in Stanton, Virginia, 250 miles west of my home and west of my catchment area. My email address is all small letters, S as in Michael, M as in, S as in Samuel, M as in Michael, H as in Henry, _ 691 at hotmail.com. If you'd like to give me a little bit of support, or get together, or wish me luck, please send me an email. Or if you or somebody you know might be willing to be my medical malpractice attorney, so I don't have to take this case to court myself by the pro se method, my mailing address is Steve Hornstein, H as in Henry, ORNSTEIN. The address is 3302 Gallows, GALLOWS Road in Falls Church, FALLS Church, Virginia. The zip code is 22042. Just as my neuropsychological testing has greatly cleared up the last 35 years, I don't even have a cognitive deficit now. I'm doing much, much better. About 6 years ago, when I was at the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute, and Dr. Jeanette McAllen went over my testing with me, it was suggested in writing that I try to have a 20-minute conversation with someone every day. So one thing I like to do, if I'm in a McDonald's or a 7-Eleven and I see a policeman or somebody from the armed forces, I like to say, hi, you look great. Where do you work out? And then they tell me where they work out, and then I answer and tell them where I work out. From January of 2008 till March of 2012, I was able to work out with a lot of my friends, John Toish and Bob Jack and other friends, and we enjoyed the ellipticycle. We enjoyed using the computer a little bit, and that was very wholesome. As the years have gone by, and I'm very proud that I have not been in a seclusion room in the past 10 years, and I have not had any kind of injection in the last 10 years. It's been 15 years since I've had a depression. As often as possible, Saturday afternoons between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., I attend the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance support group in the meeting room of the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute. We have 2 facilitators, and we have anywhere from 4 to 20 other people that come there. Recently, I've sent a letter to Depression Bipolar Support Alliance in Chicago asking to be appointed to the board of directors. I'm 62 years old now. I'm a bit overweight from the medicines I'm taking, and I won't be around forever to share my experiences and what I have learned. With the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which has headquarters in Arlington, and almost 2/3 of their budget comes from the pharmaceutical companies, and they're constantly promoting all of the different medicines such as Haldol, lithium, stelazine, Prolixin, lithium, as such. And I have had good experiences in the past doing volunteer work for NAMI, working under my friend Marshall Epstein for a 4-year period. But I've been to 2 NAMI national conferences in Washington, D.C. the last 6 or 7 years, and they're fascinating with the exhibition booth room, the exhibition hall. I enjoy it very much. But about 3 or 4 years ago, at the NAMI National Conference at a Hilton in Washington, D.C., I mentioned at an open mic in front of the board of directors that there weren't many consumers, what you might call consumers, clients, or patients. It doesn't matter what you call us. There weren't that many working in the NAMI national offices. They had about 80 people working in the national offices, and a number of the people had a BA degree and were making well over $100,000 a year. It was the NAMI director, Michael Fitzpatrick, who fired me from my volunteer job because I mentioned that NAMI headquarters had very few consumers. Looking back, and I do have another cartoon book captioned, I'm working on the drawings, I can look back and see some of the humor finally as I get a little bit older. It happens that I grew up very nervous. I was playing high school at Woodrow Wilson. I was playing tennis at Woodrow Wilson High School in Portsmouth, Virginia. And besides playing outdoors in the winter in our sweats, we ran the hallways. My sister, Lee, who is a physician, she wrote an article when I was in high school in the mid-1960s and said I would rather sit in a lounge chair in our living room reading Sports Illustrated Friday evenings rather than go out on a date. Of course I would rather read Sports Illustrated Friday afternoons instead of going out on a date. I learned a whole lot, and as I was quite nervous with very few social skills, instead of having a bar mitzvah party, my father, Bert Hornstein, drove myself, my cousin Leon Levinson, and 3 or 4 of my friends down to Raleigh, North Carolina to see the Eastern Regionals at March Madness. We were able to see Bill Bradley for Princeton, Wally Jones for Villanova, and Bob Verger for Duke, and a fellow last name Washington for Connecticut. It was a trip of a lifetime. I've tried to be as productive as I could, and I'm more interested now in public health rather than psychiatry as a specialty, because in public health I don't have to do a 4-year residency after a 1-year rotating internship. I'm very proud that 3 or 4 times over the last 30 years I've been awarded 1-gallon donation pins by the Red Cross in Norfolk and by Inova Fairfax Hospital in Northern Virginia. I've been very active with my B'nai B'rith social and public service group. I've been able to do some tutoring with the Tidewater Literacy Council. I've been able to take courses at Norfolk State University, Old Dominion University, Tidewater Community College, and Lynchburg College. I'm hoping to do a public service internship soon and then work on my medical degree. The eminent internist and dean, Dr. Robert Thomas Manning, who started our medical school with Dr. Patricia Bell Williams and Dr. Robert Thomas Manning told us twice, once at our Lunar Society meeting where I hosted the students and the deans to hear what the program was about in November of 1973. He told us then and again that all of us would graduate even if we were 80 years old. I've been able to travel to Israel twice working on kibbutz settlements, once with my cousin Leon. I toured the Anne Frank house on the way back from Israel in 1970. I've been able to travel to Puerto Rico, St. Croix. It was Dr. Mason Andrews, an obstetrician gynecologist in the late 1950s, who suggested to Norfolk City Council that Norfolk could develop a medical school. Already in Virginia, we had two excellent medical schools, the University of Virginia and the Medical College of Virginia. Dr. Robert Thomas Manning came from the University of Kansas in 1971, and two of the first people who were brought on board as faculty were Dr. Patricia Bell Williams, a doctoral researcher, and also Dr. Robert McCombs, who was a microbiologist but quickly became an associate dean, sat on all of the Student Progress Committee meetings for a 35-year period. There were many times, looking back, I can find some humor in some situations, but frequently when I was traveling, especially after I threw away my lithium and stelazine or a little bit of Resperdal pills, I would end up out of town and stranded. I'm not embarrassed to say that I've been in over 25 mental health facilities the last 40 years, and I've been through a lot of stigma, but I've also done well with advocacy. At our Depression Bipolar Support Alliance support meetings at the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute, we constantly say to each other and to the new members, be proud of yourself. Fight the stigma. Be proud that you get out of bed and take a shower and have breakfast. Be proud if you're doing volunteer work. Be proud if you make some more friends. Be proud if you become a peer counselor. Looking back, I'm very, very proud of what I've been able to accomplish. It's just a shame that Ronald Dozoretz, the psychiatric czar Hitler, and Richard Poe, formerly of Eastern State Hospital, and Michael Solomon, it's a shame that they crippled me over the years. In the year 1999, when I was writing my poem, The Sabbath Queen, my brother Donald mentioned to me how it was important to be with other Jews on the Sabbath. I very much enjoyed reading Senator Joseph Lieberman's book, Sabbath, The Gift of Rest, and as the cantor Sidney Rabinowitz tells me, our Jewish choral leader, on the Sabbath, let the Lord rest as well as yourself. Thank you.